Tallahassee. For those of you who are going to stay this weekend, it's going to be cold. We may get some snow. You know, of all the things I'm proud of, not that this is like the most important, but we had a big snowstorm in North Florida last year, and it was forecasted and it was pretty certain, and so we got our emergency management team together. I was like, because, if you're like in Boston and it snows, they salt the roads, plow it, and people just go on. Florida, with our driving and everything, I was just like, so we had plows, we had salt, we had all that stuff. So you ended up, I think you got to like 6 or 8 inches some places in the Panhandle or whatever. But, we brought in this stuff and everything like that. And like, all things being equal, was probably as low impact as we could have. I thought there was going to be cars spinning out everywhere and all this other stuff, so it didn't end up, but we were able to we had 3 hurricanes in 24, then we get in the beginning of 25, we did the snowstorm. So no hurricanes this year, but you know what? If dealing with another snowstorm is the price I have to pay for no hurricanes, sign me up, my man, I will do that. So I just got back. We were down in Pinellas County, and I was able. Yeah, there you go. We were at Seminole High School, and I appointed the next justice to the Florida Supreme Court, Judge Adam Tannenbaum from the First District Court of Appeals. Done a really good job, and he was the valedictorian of Seminole High School in 1989. Graduated one at UF as well. And then has been a really strong jurist. But, he made the comments like, when I was, while getting my diploma here, I never thought I'd be on the Florida Supreme Court. But, Seminole High School, because I went to Dunedin. That was like our big baseball. They were very good in baseball, big baseball rival. And so, I thought to myself, well, yeah, I didn't think I was going to be governor, but even if I somehow thought that, I definitely didn't think me as a Dunedin Falcon would be appointing a Seminole Warhawk to the Supreme Court. No way. But it's funny how it goes. But I will tell you, of all the things that gets talked about with Florida, the change in the judiciary, I think, is probably one that is most often overlooked. People forget when I became governor for decades, we had a very activist judiciary. The legislature could pass good policies, and it wasn't whether it was constitutional, and I was really whether these judges just didn't like it. And so they undid medical malpractice reform. They undid things, and it was really, I think, created uncertainty in business because, you could see the law, but then you have no idea how the Supreme Court would rewrite it. And and then even things like Bush versus Gore back in 2020 or 2000, which was, obviously it was a divided vote in Florida, but they were doing whatever they could to we're only going to count these counties here, all this stuff. And so that was their mindset. So when I came in, they had 3 of them had mandatory retirement. So I was able to do 3 in my first month in office. We've since done 2 additional, and then Tannenbaum's the 6th. So of the 7 justices, on the Supreme Court, 6 of them were appointed by me. And as long as they rule good, I want you to remember that. If they ever do anything bad, then it is what it is. And so they're able to now do that. But I would say, if there's something that is enacted, you really can take it to the bank that it's not going to be rewritten 6 ways from Sunday from the Supreme Court. And that's really, really important to have that certainty and the predictability. One of the things, we work with the chamber on some of these initiatives and whether they should even be allowed on the ballot. Having things on the ballot, it's one thing if we said, okay, you need to get 3/5 of the vote in each legislature to pass a law, whatever. Like whether that's good or not, we all know what that means. You read that and you can decide. The stuff that's on the ballot, people don't even know what it means. There's no definitions. So you end up voting And there's people that may view it totally differently, and that is not the way, to do business. So the court obviously has a role to police that, and sometimes they've done a good job. 24 more recently, they probably should have been more aggressive on that, and we were disappointed, with the outcome. I definitely think our new justice is very much keyed on to how the dangers of having that, just kind of like a jump ball constitutionally, where we can't even agree on what we're all voting on, can't agree on the definition. That is not the way, to do business. And I do think if you can have interests put in hundreds of millions of dollars to try to change the Constitution, like, that's not grassroots driven. Like, let's just be clear. I mean, those are people that are trying to use that process to be able to get an advantage. So I do think he understands that, and on all the other stuff, I think will be very, very good. But the courts, I think, are really important, and I think our judiciary has improved dramatically over the last 7 years. Not even a question, that it has. We also have what we've done on the legislative side with the litigation reform. So we were down in Broward County on Monday announcing that Citizens Insurance, so they had submitted whatever, but our agency approved really significant decreases. I think the most they've ever had. It's like 14% in Broward and Miami-Dade for Citizens policies. There are 1 million policies less than they were 2 years ago, partially because the private market is coming back. They don't have as much exposure as they did then, and so they were able to do. But they don't have the same costs with litigation. When we were doing the reforms, the homeowners was obviously a big issue because it had been escalating. It was escalating everywhere in the country, but for us, it was escalating in ways that didn't even make sense. When you have 8% of claims and you have 78% of litigation expenses, how does that make any sense at all? Obviously, we had some problems. The interesting thing about that is you get those numbers a couple years ago. Most of that litigation was Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, which did not have a hurricane anytime recently. So it's like, how is this? So this is just normal wear and tear on homes, and like, it's the litigation's out of control. So when that was done, we knew it would take some time. That is just one way. You have auto companies, USAA, 8% or 10% reduction. Progressive is 8%. Home companies, 8% reduction. This is all like the norm that's now coming in. And 100%, if you ask them, why did that happen? 100% will say it was because of the legal reforms that were done in 22 and 23 in the state of Florida. And I'll tell you, I know there's people in this room that have been trying to do litigation reform for a long time. The only reason it got done is because I won the big victory. I mean, let's just be clear. We had momentum. There was a lot of folks that, had interest to stop that. But it was just too much of a freight train. We just did it and went. And then I think you saw how difficult it could be when you had attempts in the Florida House last year to try to repeal it, even when we were seeing positive results trying to do that. But since then, I think the indicators have only gotten better. I don't think that there's any way anyone can point to any of this stuff and say anything's gotten worse as a result of that. I think things have turned in a better direction, and it's not going down anywhere in the country. So when you have an 8% or 10% reduction in auto policies premiums, that is not, it is going up in other parts of the country and up significantly in other parts of the country. So that was really, really important, and I think it's probably performed better than what people thought it would happen. Even Uber, they're now, I think it's millions of dollars in reduced fares and in the Florida market as a result, more than that probably. And they actually sent out a notice to all their customers saying, you are paying less. You're paying less than in other similar markets are paying, and it's only because of these reforms. So we're going to keep you apprised as to whether anything happens as a result of that. And so that's going all the way down to the driver, small business, contractor level, but then also to the customer level, even there on a consumer-facing product. So all in all, it's been very, very successful. It needed to happen. Florida is just I mean, we just have been a very litigation-happy state for a long time. I don't know that it's totally been, 100%. There's probably more that we'd like to do, but the reality is we're in a much better spot. And it's the judicial reform, judicial people, but it's also the legislative. And so you really need both to be able to go hand in hand. I did the State of the State. I was able to talk about some stuff. My view is just like most of what happens with politics is theater nowadays, right? And it doesn't actually matter because they're not actually getting things done. I think Florida has been a great exception to that, where the things we're doing actually matters. I mean, I talked about, what we've done on Everglades restoration, very important, ambitious thing, huge change in what's gone on there. We've talked about higher ed, major reforms in our universities, K through 12, universal school choice, really significant stuff that we've been able to do, and ultimately that's what it's all about. It's being able to put points on the board and making sure that you're actually doing things that are impacting people's lives. Obviously, during the pandemic, I had to take decisions that were not popular, that subjected me to a lot of attacks, but really set the foundation for the state to zoom past other states, because Florida was the place to be, and we still are to a certain extent, but there was like almost an irrational rush to Florida. It was just like people had to get out of some of these other areas. There was a lot of stuff going on, and they flooded down to the state of Florida, and really the state's done very well. And Mark mentioned the GDP. I mean, we've had a massive increase in the size of our economy just in the last 7 years to be able to, and I mean, the estimates are from like 1.5 trillion to like 1.8 trillion, depending on how you do it. But if it's 1.5, that's a 50% increase in the size of your economy from where we had been the whole history of the state to just 7 years. And then if it's 1.8, that's 80%, $800 billion increase, which would be, we were probably, you go back 15 years, our whole economy was that much. And so we've been able to do that just here. I do know this is a fact. We've had more income move into the state of Florida since I've been governor that's ever moved into any state over a similar period of time in the entire history of the Republic. That's a big deal. And so it's provided opportunities. It also provides challenges. I mean, the price of it used to be Florida was like a pretty good discount from some of these other places. But what was happening is like people that got fed up with living in California, they're in Newport Beach. They have a 3-bedroom, 3-bath home, 2,000 square. They're going to sell that for like $3 million, right? So then they can come in Sarasota and they can buy one twice that size for half the price. And so you would see, and these are cash offers, everything. So the valuations, the prices definitely went up. Now, I mean, we're not in that same rush where people are just buying property. The market's much more frozen. Obviously, I think there's what people are making has not caught up with where the pricing is. So you're going to see interest rates. There's a lot of different factors on that, but affordability you hear a lot about. The way I look at it is, what can we control and what can we not control? Forcing things like trying to take over parts of the economy or trying to we're going to dictate this, like that sounds good. It just ultimately doesn't work, right? And so we've got to create conditions, and that's what we've tried to do in the insurance reform, create conditions that's going to attract more people to do business in Florida and then empower the consumers to be able to have choices. I run into people on car insurance. You said that Progressive was going to do less. I didn't see that in mine. I was like, well, did you shop for anyone? They're like, no. I'm like, well, try to shop. And then they will, I saved $200 or I saved $400. Okay, well, good. Well, that's what you have to do. That's how these market economies work. But it'd be good to say, hey, I could you could pay $5 for this. It's just not the way. So you got to create an environment that empowers consumers and empowers small businesses. And we've worked really hard to do that across the board. But the one thing of all the things that home prices, we can't control that's a market. The insurance, we did things to solidify the market, but ultimately those are private companies. They're either going to offer or not offer. We try to create the best conditions we can for the homeowner, but the one thing we do control is the tax. Well, we don't at the state level directly, but through our Constitution and local governments on property tax. And what's happened is, well, one, some people just can't afford it, right, because of how much it's gone up. Two, it's distorted the normal turnover in the housing market. Because think about it. If you're somebody that's older, you're an empty nester, maybe you got a 4-bedroom, 4-bath, 4,000 square foot home, and you want to downsize. The problem is, if you've had that home for 20 years, your tax basis is going to be much lower on that bigger home than on the home you buy to downsize. So you're going to sign up for a much larger tax bill because the valuations have gone up. So what do? You stay put. Well, part of the way young people can afford things is these things turn over, right? That's kind of a natural yin and a yang. So I've talked to a lot of, elderly who, some of them are getting squeezed by it, but I think a lot of it is, they really are stuck. So you're there, you're stuck. You don't want to give up that tax basis because you go to the next one and the tax basis is going to be 3 or 4 times, even if the property is not as nice. And so that's just what we're dealing with. So when people say things to me when I go around the state, so in the state level, think of what we've done. We rely primarily on a sales tax, but if you're somebody who is strapped, who's just doing you basically don't pay sales tax because you don't pay on groceries, you don't pay on medications, and then we've excluded all baby items. So if you're raising kids, diapers, wipes, strollers, all that other stuff, done. I remember the day I signed that permanent exclusion in the law. Was about 2 months after our youngest got out of diapers. And my wife asked me why I didn't do that my first year as governor. Well, we wouldn't have inflation that year, so it was, I guess it wasn't something people were talking about as much. But you did that. So you don't have any, so that's that. No income tax, obviously. We eliminated the tax on business rent. So that's a tax that's totally gone now. And so it's like, what other taxes can you really cut at the state level? Because the thing about consumption is, if you talk to like a kind of like people that are not Marxist economists but like market economists, they will say consumption's the best way to do it. Then they would say income, and then the wealth taxes are the worst, like what California is trying to do, property, all that other stuff. And so because the consumption, there's a certain amount of voluntariness in that, right? If you don't want to pay tax, then don't buy the new car, whatever. You have different things. And when you exempt the essentials, it doesn't hit low-income people the way this. So there's not a lot that we could do. There's some little taxes, and maybe some of your industries people will talk about, and it's not like I'm for those, but I will tell you, when you cut those, not a single voter even knows you're cutting them, right? It doesn't create changes in behavior or anything like that. So no one's ever complained to me about state tax. It's really what's going on in local tax. And so we're working on getting something that's going to be strong for the ballot. You got to have 2/3 of each house be willing to put it on the ballot, and then 60% of the voters have to approve it. And that's just because we don't do the property tax at the state. We're not getting any of that revenue. It's all local. And there's some people say, you can't do property tax. We're not going to have police. We're not going to have schools. Listen to this. 2019, the total amount of property tax revenue brought in by local governments in Florida was $32 billion. Last year was $56 billion. So, that's like an 80% increase. Now, are you 80% better off in services and all? Of course not. What happened was you had big valuation increases, you had a rush, you had money coming in, and that money, has been spent. So I don't think that this current trajectory would be sustainable to go from 32 to 56 and continuing to see it. So just from a feasibility perspective, you got to have protection for taxpayers. But we're also in a unique situation. We could do this in ways, and we're focusing on your primary residence, your homestead. Look, if I was starting from scratch, I would not do property tax at all. I would focus on consumption in other ways, especially with a state that brings in a lot of tourists and people, let them pay, contribute, right? But we are where we are on that. But the homestead is about a third, 30%, 33% of the total amount of revenue. And it makes sense, right? Because when you lock that in, it doesn't go up as much. The people come in for the second homes, they're constantly having a higher tax basis. So the reality is we have opportunity to do. Now, I mentioned different things. Should you be able to just move from New York the next day and claim it? Maybe not, right? I mean, maybe we want to figure it out. So there's different incentives that we're working through, but I think that would be the most meaningful thing for individuals to be able to provide relief on that. And we have a big enough economy, we have enough of a tax base where you'd be able to adequately handle all the things. But people are saying, where are you going to get money to plug this? Why doesn't everyone say, where are they going to find money to spend less? I mean, what's wrong with spending less? I don't understand why we should say that the budget should almost double, in a 6 or 7 year period. I just don't think that that's rational. In the state of Florida, look, if you look, when I came in, we were in the 90 billions. Recently, we're 100 and whatever, 16, 17. Now, if you account for population growth and inflation, really isn't much of an increase because we've had 25% inflation the past 5 years. But in the last 3 years, we've basically been the same level. I mean, we've been between, like 115, 118 billion, somewhere around there. I veto spending, and I vetoed about 10 billion over my tenure. That's a record. No one's done as much as that. So, I've played my part in keeping that down. But the reality is, we've shown, even in the state growing, you haven't seen massive increases in spending. So I think it can be done. I think it's something that's important, and that's going to be something we're going to be working through. I don't know that we're going to have something passed in the regular session. It may be something that you come back to do, but the reality is you can't do it before November anyways. And someone was like, well, no. If you can call a special election for it. Yeah, you need 3/4 of each house of the legislature. That's not viable for us. So you got to get 2/3 to put it on in November. So that's really it. So you have until pretty much, I think, August 1st to be able to get that done. I think it'll get done before then. But we're working with folks in both chambers on that. We're also going to come back and do the redistricting for Congress. I do think that the Supreme Court is going to issue a ruling that's going to require us to do that anyways. But I also think with our population, we got shortchanged on the redistricting last time. When the first Trump administration was leaving office, I met with the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, and I said, what are we getting? He's like, you're going to get 2 seats, and Texas is going to get 3, which, was reasonable, right? Well, but they hadn't finished it, right? So they did the counting, but then you got to go through and you collate the data. So then the Biden administration came in, he issued some executive orders, upended the way they were doing that. A few months later, they put out the document, Florida only got 1, and Texas only got 2. Rhode Island was supposed to lose 1. They ended up losing 0. Who was the Commerce Secretary that came in for Biden? The former governor of Rhode Island. So, it is what it is, right? But there's no way you can say Florida should have only gotten 1 seat in a 10-year period. It just said. So we're malapportioned off of that anyways. But then what's happened is the migration into Florida just in the last 4 or 5 years, that's been more migration than you'd normally get in a 10 or a 15-year period. So there's some districts that you have a lot more votes being cast than in other districts. So there's a whole bunch of reasons to be able to do that. So we've set that for some time in April, I think the later part of April. Our primary is in late August, so it gives you time to be able to do all that. So that will happen, and then stay tuned. The other thing that I mentioned in the speech yesterday is, with the use of artificial intelligence, I mean, on the one hand, it's like, technology is going to help you do your job better, run your business better. People are saying it can be used for great medical advances. I hope that's true. I mean, they also promised stuff with the internet that it would solve all these problems, and that didn't happen. But I hope it's all true. Military, all this other stuff. But there's also an undercurrent to this about, displacing humans, about not being controlled by humans, kind of a transhumanist strain that I think is very dangerous for society. I think it will cause huge problems in our society. And the fear I have, and so we're saying let's create a Bill of Rights for consumers. Let's make sure that they're protected against the excesses of this. But what's going to happen? They're putting a lot of capital investment into this, right? Well, although the data centers, no one wants the data centers. I started talking about this a few months ago, and everyone's like, oh, well, the tech, they're so wealthy. So I was like, trust me, people don't want data centers. I was like, because it takes as much power as a city with 500,000 people, right? So it's like, there's a capacity issue, and then there's a cost issue. They take a lot of water, all this stuff. So a lot of people don't want it, and you've had a lot of blowback around the country. Well, now, you even have the president now saying, no passing on costs of data centers. You've got activists on the left and right that are doing that. So that's kind of just a proximate thing. But then, but they're putting a lot of money into it, and they got to make money on the back end. Well, how do you do it? Honestly, they're going to try to sell ads, get people on these products, and then sell ads or sell subscriptions. That's what. And now, is that going to be things that are going to, really broaden the horizons of the human experience? No, it's going to be AI slop. It's going to be, taking somebody and putting a different head on them and putting a funny dance and all this stuff. I mean, it's going to be a lot of mindless stuff. Although I will tell you, my wife has put on things like, write a song about, our kids, right? And they will write it. And then you can put it to a different app. Well, they will play it, like with music, like playing. And Madison, Mason, Mamie, and Dad all were like, stop with these AI songs. They're terrible. The kids hate them. So it's like, so there is a little hope there. But they're going to try to monetize, right? And that's what's going to end up happening. And some of these chat bots, it's unfortunate. I've got a mom down in Central Florida. Her son committed suicide because the chat bot was basically pushing him in that direction. I had a mom from Texas at one of our events. Her son was being told by the chatbot that he needed to report her to the police, and that eventually it kind of escalated where the chatbot said you'd be justified in killing her, his own mother. So this is stuff that's out there. So it's really, really problematic. So I think what we're doing is something that it's not going to stop anyone from curing cancer, but what it is going to do is empower parents. It's going to have transparency. It's going to have accountability. Now that President Trump has put out his statement on the data centers, I think that's going to fly through. I think everyone's going to be fine with that. But this is going to continue to be a bigger issue. And technology is great, but it needs to be moral. It needs to be ethical. It needs to reinforce our values as Floridians and Americans. It needs to enhance the human experience, not try to supplant the human experience. And I think there are things that can be done where that's channeled in a very, very positive direction. But make no mistake about it, to just say that a handful of Silicon Valley companies, are going to deliver us to the promised land and all this stuff, just left to their own devices, that's not their incentive to do that. We got to beat China and AI. Fine. These companies want to sell to China. They're not trying to beat them. That's not what their incentives are. So their incentives are to make money, deliver value for their shareholders. I get it. No problem. But don't say then, we want all this other stuff, and that somehow these companies are going to do when that's not what they're incentivized to do. So I think our efforts on this are very thoughtful. I think they're very targeted, but I think they're necessary. And I think if we don't, I look back at when the internet, they did the Section 230, which basically gave immunity to big tech. And they said, well, if you don't do this, you're not going to have innovation. I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that could have been handled differently at the time. And so now, there was initially a push last year to do like an AI amnesty for 10 years where states would be kneecapped from being able to do anything with AI. They didn't have a federal rule. It really wasn't a federal preemption because they didn't know what they wanted. They just didn't want us to do anything. And that's like, that's letting the inmates run the asylum. So we're not going to do that. And I think it'll end up being something that'll be very thoughtful and very, very good. But with that, we're in a great spot. The state's doing well. We've tackled that. People ask me, like, and I articulate some of the things I need to do. When they ask me, what do you need? It's like, listen, everything I told the voters I did when I stood for both of my elections, I've accomplished. Most people cannot say that, when they are in office. And so I did that. That doesn't mean there aren't anything more to do. There's always more to do. But it's kind of like playing with house money, right? It's like, okay, if I can do some stuff with property tax, if I can do some stuff with here, we want to do it. We want to move the ball forward. But we set out to do a lot of bold things. We delivered on all those promises. The state is in a very, very good direction. I think the momentum, is likely to continue. And I also think that, if it doesn't, we've got a big budget reserve. We've got the cushion that you need to be able to withstand some of the things that can be thrown our way. So all in all, it's been very fun to be able to put points on the board. Look forward to working with you guys, over the next balance of the next year. There is more to do. We will do more. And, we are the #1 performing state in the country. If you look at all the metrics that you can, we're the #1 performing state. Other states are asking what's Florida doing. We typically don't ask what they're doing. Not that some of them aren't doing good stuff, but, we're out there leading and we're doing it first for everybody. So thank you all for what you've done, and God bless everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, the governor of the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis.